Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place that takes that huge, often confusing ocean of information out there, boils it down, and gives you the shortcuts, really, the insights you need to be genuinely well-informed.
And today we're diving into something that, honestly, if you really take it on board, it could completely change how you approach learning a new language.
Yeah.
We're talking about the science behind it all, specifically this powerhouse idea called Comprehensible Input, CI for short.
Yes, CI. And if you listening right now have ever, suffered through years of grammar drills in a classroom, making lists of words, memorizing stuff by rote,
Oh yeah, been there.
only to freeze up or feel totally useless when you actually try to talk to someone, well, this deep dive, this is your way out. Our whole mission today is to cut through all that traditional classroom stuff that often doesn't work and show you how you can acquire a language naturally, effectively.
And actually enjoy it. That's key too. And the whole bedrock of this approach, it comes from the work of a linguist named Stephen Krashen. His main idea, his hypothesis, it's actually pretty simple when you boil it down. Acquisition, that's the subconscious, natural way you pick up a language.
Like how kids learn their first language.
Exactly like that. It happens when you get messages, language input, that you basically understand. But crucially, it contains some structure, some little bit of grammar or vocab that's just slightly beyond where you are right now.
Okay, so it's not about sitting down with a grammar book and consciously figuring out rules. It's more like absorbing it.
Absorbing it is a great way to put it. You're consuming messages where the meaning is clear, so clear that the linguistic packaging, the grammar, the new words, they just kind of slip into your brain automatically, subconsciously.
Right, that's the famous Villi plus $7 thing, isn't it?
That's the one. So so wherever you are right now, your current level of, let's say, acquired language ability. And the +1 is that new little bit.
Yeah.
Something slightly outside your comfort zone.
But how do you understand it if it's beyond your level?
That's where context comes in. Or visuals, or maybe the speaker's tone. Something makes that +1 comprehensible, understandable. And Krashen's point is, if the communication's working, if you're getting enough input that generally makes sense,
Your brain just kind of finds the pattern.
it automatically seeks out and acquires that I plus a low one. It just happens.
It really does sound almost too easy. I mean, why did we spend all those hours conjugating verbs if our brains can just do this?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? For decades, language teaching was focused almost entirely on learning, not this subconscious acquisition. So our sources today, they bring together Krashen's core ideas, but also mix in practical stuff, strategies for how to actually do this, how to read effectively, how to use TV shows, even how to, wire new words into your memory using specific techniques.
So this whole deep dive is about switching gears. Instead of fighting against how your brain naturally works, or figuring out how to work with it, focusing on, efficiency, making it effective, and maybe even fun, making sure the time you spend actually counts.
Okay, so let's really dig into this core idea Krashen talks about, because it feels like the key thing that explains why those old grammar-heavy methods often, don't really lead to fluency. Acquisition versus learning.
Right. Think of it like this. You've got an engine and you've got an editor. Acquisition is the engine. That's the natural subconscious process. The way little kids just soak up their first language by being surrounded by it, by meaningful talk. That's where real effortless fluency comes from. You're not thinking about word order. It just feels right.
Okay, the engine. Got it. So learning is the editor.
Exactly. Learning is the conscious stuff. The explicit knowledge of the rules, the grammar charts, being able to explain why something is correct or incorrect, talking about the language. And the big mistake is thinking that mastering the editor, the learning part, will somehow magically create the engine, the fluency part.
That's the trap. It just doesn't seem to work that way for producing spontaneous speech. Which brings us right to his next idea, the monitor hypothesis. How does that conscious editor, that learned knowledge, actually work when we're trying to speak?
Yeah, what does it do?
So the monitor hypothesis says that this conscious knowledge, the learning part, it only really functions as a sort of filter or a monitor for your language output. It can only check and maybe repair what you say after your acquired system. The engine has already produced the sentence.
So it doesn't actually create the sentence, it just tweaks it afterward.
Right. It doesn't initiate speech, it just corrects it. Or tries to.
Okay, but hang on. If that's all our conscious learning is good for, why does it feel so incredibly useless when you're actually in a conversation? Like, I know the rule, but I can't seem to apply it fast enough.
Because using that monitor effectively, it's incredibly demanding. The sources point out three big constraints that make it almost impossible to rely on in a real flowing conversation.
Okay, what's the first one? I bet I can guess. Time.
Bingo. Time. When you're talking to someone, you're focused on meaning, on connecting. You almost never have enough mental bandwidth or just sheer time to stop, run a grammar check in your head like, did I use the right past tense there? Before you need to understand and respond to what they just said.
Yeah, if you pause to think about the grammar, the conversation just dies.
It completely stalls, which leads straight into constraint number 2, focus on form.
Yeah.
Even if somehow the conversation slows way down, you'd have to deliberately shift your attention away from the meaning, away from what the other person is actually saying, and focus hard on the linguistic correctness. That's a huge cognitive load.
You stop listening, basically.
You do. And then there's the third constraint, which people often forget. You actually have to know the rule. I mean, really know it, consciously. Many grammar rules are incredibly complex, with tons of exceptions.
Correct.
So even if you magically had the time and managed to focus on form, if you don't actually remember the specific technical rule for, I don't know, adjective agreement in French right at that moment,
The monitor's useless anyway.
totally useless.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this. The person who spends all their time memorizing grammar rules is essentially building the super detailed, powerful editor. But it's an editor that only works in slow motion, like when you're carefully writing something, not when you're publishing in real time, like in a conversation.
That's a perfect way to put it. And we see the outcome, right? Krashen calls them monitor overusers. These are the language learners who are constantly checking themselves against the rules they've learned. They talk hesitantly. They stop mid-sentence to correct themselves.
They sound unnatural.
Very unnatural. They're prioritizing correctness over actually communicating. They sacrifice fluency because they're running this constant, often crippling, internal grammar check. The real goal should be to let the engine, the acquired system, just run the show.
Okay, this feels like a good place to bring in something else crucial, something that's not strictly linguistic, the affective filter. You mentioned anxiety before. It sounds like you could have the best input in the world, but if this filter is up, nothing gets through.
Exactly. The affective filter hypothesis is huge. It basically says that our emotional state, things like our attitude, how motivated we are, how inhibited or self-conscious we feel, and especially anxiety, creates this kind of mental barrier.
A filter.
A filter. And if that filter is high, maybe you're stressed, anxious, feeling judged, or just bored and unmotivated, then even if the language input coming at you is perfectly understandable, perfectly comprehensible, it doesn't reach the part of the brain responsible for acquiring language. Krashen calls it the language acquisition device, or LAD.
It's like the information hits a wall.
Pretty much. Like trying to pour water into a bottle but keeping the cap on. The input is understood, maybe, but it doesn't get acquired.
So that feeling of panic when a teacher calls on you in class, or the fear of saying a word wrong, or just worrying about looking stupid, that literally makes your brain block the very information it needs to learn.
That's the idea. It blocks acquisition. Understanding might happen on a surface level, but it's not feeding the engine. And this is why study after study shows that things like personal motivation, feeling good about the language, and having low anxiety, a low affective filter, are just as vital as getting the right kind of input.
Okay, so the goal then isn't just getting comprehensible input, it's getting it while keeping that filter down. How do we actually do that? It's easy to say don't be anxious, but...
Yeah, easier said than done. Well, the sources suggest a few practical things. First, choose your environment carefully. Look for places to practice where you won't feel judged. Maybe a language exchange partner who cares more about chatting than correcting every little thing, or even just picking materials, books, shows that you genuinely find interesting.
Right, because if you're bored, your motivation dips, filter goes up.
Exactly. So forcing yourself to watch, I don't know, a historical drama in German because you think you should, even if you hate historical dramas. That's probably a bad move, even if you understand the words.
Terrible strategy. Okay, what else?
Embracing a different mindset about mistakes is huge.
Hmm.
Seeing them not as failures, but as like necessary data points. Information about what you still need to acquire. Self-talk helps. If you mess up a sentence, try to laugh it off, you know.
Don't beat yourself up.
Exactly. The second you acknowledge the mistake, without feeling that shame or embarrassment, you're actively lowering the anxiety, lowering the filter. The constant aim has to be keeping that filter low so you stay open to the input that's coming in.
Okay, so if acquisition really hinges entirely on this comprehensible input, AI plus $1er, then the whole game becomes about maximizing how much of it we get and making sure it's the right kind of input. Let's start with the quality. What makes input good for acquisition?
Well, the key idea here is that we want input that is roughly tuned, not finely tuned.
What's the difference? Finely tuned sounds. Precise.
Finely tuned is like your typical textbook syllabus.
Ah.
This week we mastered the simple past, next week the past continuous. It focuses intensely on one specific grammar point at a time, but that's often slow, kind of boring, and it doesn't give you the massive amount of context you need for real acquisition.
Okay, so roughly tuned is messier, more natural.
Exactly. It means focusing on real communication, stuff you find engaging. If you, the learner, are generally understanding the main message, maybe like 95% of it,
Yeah.
then the necessary Y plus dollar bits, those slightly more advanced structures, they'll just naturally show up again and again.
Without the teacher having to deliberately plan for it.
Right. The brain picks up the pattern because the overall message is clear. Think about it. A new past tense form might appear naturally in context dozens, maybe hundreds of times, just through listening or reading, long before anyone sits down to explain the rule. You acquire the pattern first because you understood the messages.
This sounds like where those simplified ways of speaking come in handy, especially at the start, like teacher talk or foreigner talk.
Oh, absolutely essential bridges, especially for beginners. When native speakers talk to learners, they often unconsciously simplify things, use more common words, shorter sentences, speak a bit slower, repeat things.
They're naturally making it more comprehensible.
They are. And that modification, that simplified code, it's super useful because it lowers the linguistic difficulty right away, making sure the input stays accessible and doesn't overwhelm you in those crucial early stages. Filter stays low.
But okay, if the goal is real fluency, you need a huge vocabulary, right? Not just beginner stuff. We need volume. And the sources really hammer this point. Reading seems to be the absolute king here.
Paramount.
Yeah.
Absolutely paramount. I mean, look at the numbers for our native language. Most estimates say we learn somewhere between, 15,000 to 35,000 word families by the time we're 20. And almost all of that comes from reading, not from teachers explicitly teaching us words.
Wow. So you can't just memorize a list of the top 2,000 words and expect to be fluent.
Not even close.
Yeah.
You need that massive exposure that only reading can really provide. We have to replicate that process in our new language.
And the best way to do that, according to the sources, is something called free voluntary reading, or FVR.
Yep, FVR. Basically, reading stuff you choose yourself simply because you enjoy it. No tests, no book reports afterwards, just reading for pleasure.
And that drives acquisition just through the sheer amount of input.
Exactly. But, and this is a big but, for FVR to actually work for acquisition, the material has to hit that sweet spot, that 1 plus door to 1 level. And there's actually a way to measure this called the comprehensibility threshold.
Okay, let's get specific. What's the threshold? How do I know if a book is at the right level?
The guideline is pretty clear. The material should have no more than about 2 unfamiliar words for every 100 words you read.
2 out of 100, that's not many.
It works out to roughly 1 unknown word every 5 lines of text, maybe. If you start hitting 3, 4, 5 unknown words per 100, a few things happen. It gets frustrating. You start having to guess too much. Your understanding drops.
Its effective filter shoots up.
Bingo. It stops being enjoyable, stops being comprehensible input, and becomes a chore. Acquisition stalls.
Okay, 2 words per 100, that sounds really restrictive. How on earth do you find books or articles that hit that 98% comprehension mark, especially once you're past, like, the cat sat on the mat stage?
That is the practical challenge, no doubt.
Mm.
For absolute beginners, you pretty much have to rely on specially designed materials. Things like high-quality graded readers or language learner novellas that are written using very specific, controlled vocabulary lists.
Okay, so specific learner materials for beginners. What about intermediates?
That's where you need to get a bit more creative. The sources suggest looking for material where the content is simpler or more familiar, even if the language itself is authentic native text. Think about reading simplified news articles, maybe children's chapter books, or even reading folk tales or fairy tales that you already know really well in your own language, but reading them in the target language.
So you're controlling the difficulty by picking easier topics.
Exactly. You control the subject complexity to indirectly control the linguistic complexity. Because if you don't manage that input carefully, you run smack into what the sources call the intermediate hurdle.
The intermediate hurdle sounds painful.
It can be brutal. You know those reading passages in intermediate textbooks? They're often loaded with infrequent vocabulary and really complex grammar-like, obscure verb tenses you almost never hear in real life.
They're designed to be challenging.
Right, but the challenge often backfires. That high density of unknown stuff makes the whole passage borderline incomprehensible. You spend all your energy just trying to decode individual words instead of absorbing the message. Ironically, it's often less frustrating and more effective to read a real native article about a simple, familiar topic than it is to struggle through one of those artificially difficult intermediate texts.
Makes sense. Okay, let's shift from reading to listening. This is often where people feel the most blocked. How do we apply these CI principles to boosting listening skills, especially with things like movies or podcasts?
With listening, the name of the game is always front-loading comprehension, trying to understand before you even hit play, if possible. One great technique, especially for maybe the first full book you tackle, is to pair the reading with an audiobook.
Read and listen at the same time.
Yeah, or listen shortly after reading a chapter. And ideally pick a story you already know really well. Maybe it's a book that was turned into a movie you've seen, or even just a translation of a favorite book from your childhood.
Why does knowing the story help so much?
Because that familiarity with the plot, the characters, it acts like a scaffold. It stops you from getting totally lost or bogged down every time you hit a word you don't know. And hearing the audiobook helps you internalize the rhythm, the intonation, the stress patterns of the spoken language. That's crucial stuff you don't get just from reading.
And naturally, movies and TV shows are great CI sources too because of the visuals.
Oh, ideal.
Yeah.
They are high-density CI factories. All those visual clues, what the characters are doing, their facial expressions, the setting, the objects around them, they provide constant context that helps you understand what's being said, even if you don't catch every word.
It makes the input comprehensible in real time.
Exactly. If a character points at a dog and says the word for dog, your brain makes that connection instantly. Boom. Perfect Ivlay plus Nalbron acquisition, because the visual guaranteed you understood.
Okay, confession time. When I watch foreign shows on Netflix, I almost always turn on the subtitles. But in the target language, I feel like it helps me match the sound to the spelling. But you're saying the sources argue against that?
Yeah, that's a classic subtitle problem. It feels helpful, but the evidence suggests it's actually counterproductive for improving listening skills specifically.
Why?
Because fundamentally, reading is just easier for our brains than processing spoken language. So when those target language subtitles are right there on the screen, your brain naturally takes the path of least resistance. It relies on your eyes, on reading the text, and it stops doing the hard work of actually processing the sounds, decoding the speech stream.
So my ears get lazy because my eyes are doing the work.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
To really force your listening comprehension to improve, your brain needs to grapple directly with the audio input. If you absolutely feel you need a crutch, a better strategy is maybe reading a summary before you watch, not using subtitles during.
Ah, okay, that leads perfectly into the next strategy. Pre-reading summaries.
Yeah, this is great efficiency hack. Before you watch that movie or that episode of a TV show, go find a plot summary. Wikipedia is great for this, and read it in the target language.
So you know what's going to happen.
Exactly. Yeah, it front-loads your brain with the key character names, the important plot points, and probably a lot of the specific vocabulary you're about to hear. It gives your brain a kind of roadmap. Then, when you actually watch or listen, your overall comprehension is way higher, making much more of the linguistic input genuinely comprehensible and maximizing that $1+$1 uptake.
Clever. Okay, finally for this section, let's touch on a couple of interactive things. CI doesn't have to be just sitting alone with a book or screen, right? There are classroom or one-on-one activities.
Definitely. Two good examples from the sources. First is listen and draw. It's simple. The teacher or tutor reads a text aloud, maybe describing a picture, a little story, a sequence of events, and the learners just draw what they hear.
No speaking required?
Nope. It purely checks comprehension. And it keeps the affective filter low because there's no pressure to produce language, especially early on. And bonus, the drawings themselves can then be used as a basis for discussion later, generating even more comprehensible input.
Okay, and the second one, personalized questions and answers, PQA. Sounds different from typical comprehension questions.
BQA is fantastic for making input relevant. So after reading something, instead of just asking factual recall questions like what color was the house, which can feel like a test, the teacher asks questions that connect the story to the students' own lives. Does this house remind you of a place you know? Or have you ever felt like this character?
You're making it personal.
Exactly. And here's the really clever CI part. The teacher takes the student's answer, even if the student struggles and answers partly or wholly in their native language, and then immediately restates the meaning of that answer back to the student and the whole class using simple, comprehensible target language.
Ah, so the student's own idea gets turned into instant, relevant input.
Precisely. It's this immediate feedback loop of personalized, comprehensible lies plus a dollars. Really powerful stuff.
Okay, we've firmly established that getting tons of comprehensible input is the engine, the core driver of language acquisition. But that input needs to stick, right? It needs to become permanent knowledge. So now we have to talk about memory. And if you're out there still just, repeating words over and over again,
Rote repetition.
yeah, rote repetition, here's the intervention. Our sources say that's not just mind-numbingly boring, it's actually pretty ineffective from a neuroscience perspective for building long-term memory.
Right. The basic science here is that memory isn't like writing something down on a hard drive. It's more like building a network. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Rote repetition might create a weak, temporary path, but it doesn't build strong, lasting connections.
So what does build strong connections?
We need to shift from passively reviewing information to actively recalling it.
Okay, principle number 3 then. Don't review, recall.
Active recall. That means deliberately trying to pull the memory out of your brain from scratch without looking at the answer. Why is this better? Because the effort involved in retrieving the memory is what actually strengthens the neural pathway.
Like working a muscle.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And think about that feeling when a word is right on the tip of your tongue. You know it, but you can't quite grasp it. That intense, slightly frustrating search.
Yeah, it drives you crazy.
But when you finally retrieve it, or someone tells you, the sense of relief is huge. And neurochemically, something really cool is happening right then.
Okay, what's going on in the brain?
When you successfully recall something after a struggle, your brain releases dopamine, a neurotransmitter, right into the hippocampus that's a key area for memory formation. And that dopamine burst acts like a powerful reward signal. It basically tells your brain, hey, that piece of information was hard to get, must be important. Let's lock this connection down.
So the struggle actually signals importance to the brain.
Exactly. It triggers this dopamine-fueled memory party, as one source calls it, that helps consolidate the memory for the long term. By making the retrieval effortful, you're paradoxically making the memory harder to forget later.
Okay, so if effortful recall is the key, how do we make that process efficient? We don't want to struggle too much, right? This is where spaced repetition systems, SRS, come in.
Precisely. An SRS, whether it's a fancy app like Anki or Memrise, or even the old-school physical flashcard system like the Lightner box, is basically just a smart scheduling algorithm. It's based on the science of the forgetting curve.
The what curve?
The forgetting curve. The idea that we forget things predictably over time. An SRS calculates the ideal moment to ask you to recall a specific word or fact right around the time you're about to forget it.
Ah, so it prompts you when the recall will be effortful but still possible.
Exactly. That maximizes the strengthening effect of the recall, that dopamine hit, while minimizing the total amount of time you spend studying. It forces the effort at the optimal moment.
So what's the practical takeaway for using an SRS most effectively? How much should I study a new word?
This is where the principle of maximizing laziness comes in, or maybe maximizing efficiency is a better way to put it.
I like maximizing laziness.
Well, the idea is study a new word or concept just until you can successfully recall it once without looking at the answer. Just once, then stop.
Seriously, don't repeat it like 5 more times to make sure.
Nope. Those extra repetitions right then are largely wasted effort. The SRS algorithm is designed to bring that card back later, precisely when you need to exert that effort again to strengthen the memory. The most efficient path is to stop at that point of minimal mastery, one successful recall, and trust the system to handle the optimal spacing.
Okay, but the sources also warned about just downloading pre-made flashcard decks, right? Something about the brain's filters.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Your brain is constantly filtering information, trying to decide what's important enough to keep and what's just noise. If you're just trying to memorize someone else's flashcard, their definition, their chosen image, your brain often tags that as external, maybe less relevant information.
It doesn't feel personal.
Exactly. But when you take the time to create the card yourself, maybe you find your own picture, you write your own example sentence that relates to your life, you make that connection, that creative effort helps bypass the brain's filters. You're signaling, hey, I made this is important to me. It makes the memory much stickier, much easier to store long term.
Okay, so making it personal, that links to the next idea. Using levels of processing to make these foreign words, which are inherently abstract, just sounds really more memorable. How do we do that?
Well, first step, try to avoid translation as much as possible, especially for concrete things. One popular method is starting with a list of common, concrete nouns and verbs like the 625 words list and learning them using pictures instead of English translations.
So you link the French word for dog directly to a picture of a dog, not to the English word dog.
Exactly. You're starting to build the connections directly in the target language from day one. Learning to think in the language, even for simple things, it builds a stronger foundation.
And we can make that connection even stronger by tying it to personal memories.
Oh yeah, the research here is pretty striking.
Hmm.
If you can connect a new foreign word to a specific personal memory or experience you already have, like linking the word for cat not just to a generic picture, but to your specific childhood cat remembering its fur, its meow, how it felt.
That makes it more memorable.
The claim is up to 50% more memorable. You're taking this abstract sound and anchoring it to a rich, deeply embedded neural network you already possess.
Wow. Okay, and this gets really fun apparently when you need to remember abstract stuff like noun gender, using mnemonic imagery. You mentioned exploding nouns earlier.
Yeah. Since just repeating rules like to Tish is masculine doesn't stick well, we need to leverage what our brains are good at remembering. Evolutionarily, our brains are wired to pay attention to things that are vivid, sensory, unusual, maybe a bit dangerous or funny.
Things that stand out.
Exactly. So the mnemonic trick is to deliberately create wild, memorable images for these abstract concepts. For German non-genders, for example, you could assign a vivid action or quality to each gender. Maybe all masculine nouns, their words explode violently. All feminine nouns, by words catch fire.
Yeah.
And all neuter nouns shatter like glass.
So when I learn the word for table, they're tish, I imagine a table exploding.
You imagine it exploding in a really vivid, maybe messy sensory way? That bizarre, strong image gets linked to the word, so next time you see Tish, bam, exploding table. You instantly recall the gender association, wiring it in much faster than trying to memorize der die, das. The weirder and more sensory, the better it sticks.
It's certainly memorable. Okay, last piece in this memory section, training our ears and mouths. Because apparently our adult brains are actively ignoring sound differences in other languages.
Yeah, this is a fascinating bit about brain development. Little babies are amazing. They can distinguish between almost any phonetic sounds from any language. But somewhere between about 6 and 12 months old, their brains start specializing in the sounds of their native language only.
Cool.
They literally lose the ability to easily hear the difference between sounds that don't matter in their language.
Like the R and L sound difference for native Japanese speakers learning English.
That's the classic example. Their brains have learned that the distinction isn't meaningful in Japanese, so they filter it out. As adults learning a new language, we have to actively retrain, rewire our brains to even perceive these foreign sounds correctly, let alone produce them.
So how do we rewire the ear? Just listen more.
Not just passively listen. You need targeted practice.
Yeah.
The key technique is using minimal pairs. These are pairs of words that sound very similar but have one key sound difference, like in English, ship and sheet, or niece and knees.
Okay.
You listen to these pairs, and crucially, you test yourself. Can you reliably hear the difference? Which word was said? It's this active discrimination training, doing it repeatedly, that forces your brain to notice and register that subtle phonetic distinction it was previously ignoring.
Makes sense. And what about training the mouth, producing sounds that just don't exist in English?
Two main things here. First, really pay attention early on to the spelling to sound rules of the new language. If you don't learn how letters correspond to sounds like all those silent letters in French, your brain won't connect the written word you see with the spoken word you hear, which hinders acquisition.
Okay, learn the sound rules, and for the actual sounds.
For sounds that feel physically impossible, you often need to understand the mechanics, the actual position of your tongue, lips, airflow. Sometimes you can find descriptions or diagrams.
Right.
Or sometimes there are tricks, like for that tricky nasal vowel in the French word fondue. One trick is to get your mouth into the position for making an ooh sound, like in moon. Hold that lip position. Then, while holding that shape, try to make the sound E, as in meat. The combination forces your mouth into roughly the right configuration for the French sound. It's about consciously learning the physical movements.
Right. We have spent a lot of time focusing on input, input, input. That's the engine. But we need to be clear, producing language output, so speaking and writing it is still necessary, isn't it? It just plays a different role than maybe traditional methods assumed.
Absolutely. Output is crucial.
Yeah.
Just maybe not in the way people think. It's not the primary driver of acquisition itself. Its main jobs are, well, twofold, according to the sources. First, it helps you practice and automate the patterns you've already started to acquire through all that input, like smoothing out the pathways.
Okay, practice. What's the second reason?
Second, and this is really key, output acts as a discovery tool. When you try to speak or write, you immediately find out what you don't know. You hit a wall, you need a word you haven't acquired yet, or you're unsure about a structure.
Ah, so the goal when you're speaking or writing isn't necessarily to be perfect. It's actually to find the gaps in your knowledge.
Exactly. One strategy suggested is just write quickly. Try to get your thoughts down in the target language, focusing purely on conveying the meaning you want. Don't agonize over perfection. If you hit a gap, you need a word, or you don't know how to say something fine, maybe look it up quickly using Google Translate or a dictionary, just to keep the flow going.
So embrace the imperfection.
Embrace it. The whole point of producing that output, especially writing, is to generate material that you can then get corrected, to make mistakes so you can learn from them.
And getting that correction, that feedback on your own attempts to communicate, that's like premium quality input, right?
It's arguably the best kind of comprehensible input you can get. Because when a native speaker, maybe a tutor, or someone on a language exchange site like italki or formerly Lang 8, corrects something you wrote or said based on what you were trying to express,
It's instantly relevant.
totally relevant.
Yeah.
Personalized, it's perfectly contextualized, and it directly addresses a gap that your brain just consciously identified. That makes the correction incredibly memorable and highly likely to lead to acquisition. Maximum like $1 impact.
Okay, this idea of just trying to communicate, even imperfectly, ties into the idea of conversational competence. The sources mention it's like playing the game Taboo.
Yeah, I love that analogy. In Taboo, you have a word you need to get your team to guess, but you're forbidden from using the most obvious related word. So what do?
You have to talk around it, describe it, use synonyms, improvise.
Exactly. And fluent speech in a foreign language is very similar. It's often not about having the perfect word for everything instantly available. It's about your ability to keep the conversation flowing, to improvise, to paraphrase, to talk around the gaps when you don't have the precise vocabulary or grammar structure you need.
So fluency isn't just knowing lots of words. It's being good at compensating when you don't know the words.
That's a huge part of it. The moment you can stay in the target language and successfully improvise your way through those gaps, you've made a massive leap towards functional fluency.
And part of that improvisation toolkit is having some stock phrases, right, like crutch phrases, to manage the conversation.
Oh, definitely. You want to learn useful little phrases that help you control the interaction, keep your filter low, and buy you thinking time. Things like, could you please speak a little slower? Or how do you say X? Or even framing phrases like, okay, I'm still a beginner, but I really want to learn, so please bear with me.
Or asking for specific kinds of correction, like, please correct my biggest mistakes.
Right. Having these kinds of predictable routines helps you navigate conversations more smoothly, makes you feel more in control, less anxious, and paradoxically, that feeling of being able to manage the interaction actually helps you acquire more because your filter stays down.
Okay, we have to address the big one. Grammar instruction.
Mm.
The elephant in the language learning room. If acquisition is all about input, where does studying grammar rules actually fit in? Is there any point to a grammar textbook?
Well, Krashen's theory would say that yes, technically, doing grammar drills is a form of comprehensible input. You usually understand the sentences in the drill, right?
Yeah, usually.
But as he famously put it, it's generally just not particularly interesting. And crucially, the main benefit of consciously studying grammar rules is that it feeds your conscious learning the knowledge used by that monitor, the editor. It doesn't directly build your subconscious acquisition, the engine.
So grammar study mostly helps you edit your language, not produce it fluently. It's low efficiency CI for acquisition itself.
That's the idea. So if you're a motivated learner, how should you use a grammar book without getting bogged down in boring, ineffective drills?
Yeah, what's the strategic approach?
The suggestion is to basically raise the textbook. Don't use it as a curriculum to follow chapter by chapter, doing every exercise. Instead, treat it primarily as a really good source of simple, clear, and hopefully somewhat interesting example sentences and maybe short dialogues.
Okay, so focus on the examples, not the explanations.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
You mine the book for its examples. You take those sentences, you break them down. What are the new words here? What are the new word forms? Like, how does this verb change? What's the interesting word order? And you take those components.
And turn them into flashcards for your SRS.
Exactly. High-value flashcards. You're using the textbook's carefully curated examples as your direct source of 1 equal plus $1 input, feeding them into your spaced repetition system.
So this way, I could actually acquire the pattern before the book even gets around to explaining the complicated rule behind it.
That's the goal. While the textbook is spending 5 pages explaining, say, the intricacies of the subjunctive mood, you've already taken its own example sentences, made 50 flashcards, and started getting repeated, contextualized exposure to the pattern through your SRS. You acquire the feel for it before you even tackle the theory. You're basically leveraging the textbook structure against itself to learn faster.
That's clever. Okay, finally, let's circle back to something we touched on earlier, Age. People often feel discouraged, thinking, oh, kids learn languages so easily, I'm too old. But the sources suggest adults actually have some key advantages, especially for this CI approach.
Yeah, the kids are better idea is largely a myth, or at least misleading. When you control for the sheer number of hours of exposure, adults generally learn languages faster than young children on average.
Really? Why?
Well, adults haven't lost the basic language acquisition hardware in their brains, but they also bring more developed cognitive skills. They're better at consciously spotting patterns. They can use their knowledge of their first language or other languages to make comparisons. They understand abstract concepts like grammar rules better.
They have metalinguistic awareness.
Right. But maybe the most important advantage for adults, particularly in a CI framework, is conversational management.
We talked about that with crutch phrases.
Exactly. Older learners, adults, are generally much better at actively steering a conversation to get the input they need. They know how to ask for clarification. What does that word mean? How to signal they don't understand. How to change the topic if it gets too difficult. How to explicitly ask a native speaker to slow down or simplify.
They can negotiate for comprehensible input.
Precisely. They can manage the interaction to maximize the quality and quantity of the item or add-on input they receive in a way that young children usually can't. This allows them to be more efficient acquirers.
Okay, so if adults can manage their own input, and CI is the key, where does that leave the traditional language classroom? Is there still value there, or should we just tell people to go find native speakers and read books?
Not necessarily abandon classes entirely. The sources suggest that language teaching, the classroom setting, is most valuable when it serves as the primary source of low-filter, comprehensible input for the learner.
When else would that be the case?
Think about absolute beginners who might feel intimidated finding native speakers right away, or students learning a foreign language in their home country, where they might not have easy access to hours of natural input outside the classroom.
So the class provides a safe, structured starting point.
Exactly. The real value of a good CI-based class isn't the explicit grammar lectures. It's the teacher providing lots of simplified teacher talk, using visuals, telling stories, doing activities like PQA or listen and draw. It's providing that crucial low-filter environment and maybe giving students the tools and confidence, those conversational management phrases, to then go out and get more input from the real world. It's a structured, safe training ground. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Wow, that was good. Well, a really deep dive into the science of how we actually acquire languages. We've unpacked the incredible power of getting input that's just right, that 1 + 8 rudder. We've contrasted the subconscious acquisition engine with the conscious learning editor.
Talked about the crucial need to keep that effective filter low, managing anxiety and motivation. And dug into the real science of memory, why active recall beats rote review, how dopamine helps, and using things like SRS and vivid imagery to make things stick.
The big takeaway feels like a fundamental shift, really. Moving away from that feeling of constant struggle, the anxiety over grammar rules, the boring drills, and moving towards just consuming massive amounts of language that you find interesting and largely understand, making it enjoyable.
Absolutely. When you make the process itself engaging and comprehensible, your brain just naturally wants to do the work of acquisition. It stops feeling like work.
And the payoff isn't just practical. I mean, yes, there are cognitive benefits, studies showing bilingualism might delay dementia onset by about 5 years, which is amazing. But beyond that, learning another language, it just feels good for the soul, doesn't it?
It really does. It opens doors. It connects you to whole new groups of people, new ways of thinking, new cultures. You get to see sides of them, and honestly, sides of yourself that just remain hidden if you only stay within the English-speaking world.
There's a quote from Katolom. She was this incredible Hungarian polyglot, learned something like 16 languages.
Oh yeah, she's legendary.
She had this great line that really sums up the philosophy we should probably adopt. She said something like, languages are the only things worth knowing, even poorly.
I love that. Knowing even broken Italian, being able to stumble through, asking for directions or making a simple joke, even with mistakes. It's infinitely better than staying silent, right? Waiting until you're perfect, which never happens.
Because even those flawed sentences, those imperfect attempts, they build bridges instantly between people.
They really do.
So maybe the final thought to leave you with today is this. How can you, right now, embrace making mistakes? How can you use your perfectly imperfect, maybe even poorly known language today to start building one of those bridges?